If you're just starting out in front-end development, you may have come across the front-end mentor challenges. Today, we're going to be looking at the QR code component challenge. It's a great beginner challenge, and I think one of the best ways as you're learning about front-end development is definitely to find more things to build. But if you're wondering if you're doing it right, or if you just want to see how someone else is approaching this same challenge, this video is for you. I'm going to go through this challenge from start to finish, everything from evaluating the design to creating the HTML, adding the fonts, creating the CSS, and even deploying the site to Netlify so we can see how well we did within the front-end mentor interface. You can also add this to your portfolio, or you can send it to friends or family so they can see how you're doing as well. If you're ready to dive into this challenge, let's get started. Now, the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and take our QR code component main folder, and we're going to drag and drop that into Visual Studio Code so that it brings up the folder contents. This will be the workspace that we'll work from throughout this video. As we look through this folder, we can see there's a couple of subfolders, one for the design, where we have the desktop design, we also have the mobile design and a desktop preview, and then we have the images that are needed for our project, like the favicon and the QR code image. And we can also see that it has an index.html that we'll be working from, as well as a style guide where we have some information about the colors that are used, the typography, some body copy, font sizes, the font itself, and all of that. So we have all the information that we need in order to get started with this project. The first thing we're going to do though is we're going to look at the design itself. So make sure you have the Figma design downloaded, and then we're going to take a look at what that shows as well so that we understand what we're going to have to do to approach our HTML and our CSS. Now that we're in Figma, we can see both the desktop and the mobile design that we're going to be creating for this challenge. And we can see that they are very similar to each other. So they're both using the same background color, and really the component itself does not look any different between the desktop and the mobile design, which is really a good thing when it comes to responsiveness. It means that we're going to be able to essentially code this once and then just make sure that it still looks good in the mobile view. As I'm digging in deeper, I really do want to see, do the widths change between the mobile and desktop? And I'm looking and I can see that I have a 320 pixel width on the desktop. And when I go over to the mobile, I can see that I have the same 320 pixel width, which means that the width doesn't even change, which means that we can essentially code this one almost as if it's just a static card component. I also want to see if any of the text sizes change between the two, and I am going to go ahead and break design references or detach styles because I want to be able to see those more easily. So I'm going to go ahead and detach that, and I can see that the heading is a 22 pixel bold text, and over here we have the same 22 pixel bold text, and I'm guessing this is the same as well, 15 pixel for the body copy, and then 15 pixels, I'm assuming, for the body copy over here as well. So you can see that these are the same in both places, which means essentially we're just going to have to worry about the desktop design, and then we're also going to just ensure after we code this thing that it also looks good in the mobile responsive view. The other thing that we want to do with this design is we want to go ahead and formulate a plan of attack for how we're going to create some of the HTML and the styling. So as I'm looking through the design, I can see that we have a background that's a solid color. It's a solid light gray color. And then we have a centered card. So essentially what we're going to do is probably go ahead and just make the body have a background, give the body a min height of whatever the screen size is, and then we're going to use Flexbox to center our QR code box here. Once we do that, we're probably going to give it a fixed width in this case, just because it doesn't change with mobile and desktop, and 320 pixels is already pretty small, so it's probably going to be fixed width. We're going to put a div around this content. We're going to drop this in as an image itself. So in the design, it actually has these little circles or these ovals that were used to kind of give this a little bit more visual appeal. But since in our actual images that we got with the project, those are already kind of included in the QR code image itself, we don't have to worry about kind of positioning those. So those are essentially part of the image. So we're just going to drop in that image. And then we're going to essentially just have probably a content container that we put both the title and the description in, and then just make sure that our kind of padding is aligned. I'm thinking that the title would probably be an H2 because even though it's the only heading on the page in this case, I would assume that this would be used in the context of a larger application, and it definitely wouldn't be an H1. So we're just going to make that an H2, probably a paragraph for the bottom. So I think we have a pretty good plan here. Let's go ahead and dive into the code and get this figured out and start with our HTML. Okay, so we have the HTML in front of us. Let's start diving into what's already included. So I can see that we have the basic HTML wrapper, and our head has some responsive meta tags up here. Not going to worry about those. We also already have our favicon in here. So that's great. We already have that. Not worried about that either. And we have a title, which we can keep as is. We also have this kind of attribution piece, which because the design doesn't include that, I'm going to go ahead and remove the styles for that, as well as the HTML for it. So we're going to go ahead and feel free, like it tells us, to go ahead and remove the styles for that. And we're also going to remove the div class equals attribution because we don't need that in our HTML. After we do that, we can see that the actual text of the heading and the paragraph or the description is down here. But of course, we're going to get to that, but we need to go ahead and put the frame of the actual card in there. And then after that, we'll worry about how we're going to link up our styles. So for the frame, we're going to go ahead and create a div, and we're going to give it a class of card. And inside that div, we know that we're going to have an image. So let me go ahead and add that. That's going to be an image tag with a class of card image. And we're going to give it a source of images/image QR code.png. And it's also going to have an alt of the QR code. And that's an HTML5 self-closing, so we don't need a slash there. And then we have the content, and we're probably going to go ahead and put a div around that as well, just to be able to position a little more easily. So div class equals card-content. And then in that content, we're going to have both our title and our description. So we can say h2 class equals card title. And we'll go ahead and copy and paste the text that's right here, or cut and paste, I should say, into that H2. And then in the description, we're going to have a class of card-description. And in there, we'll go ahead and copy and paste the text, or cut and paste the text that was down below as well. Okay, so that pretty much sums up all the HTML. Let's go back to our design real quick and make sure we didn't miss anything that we haven't included. But I think we're pretty much good. We can see that we have our card wrapper that's defined, our image, our title, our description. So there's not too much to the HTML to this one. I feel pretty good about where this is at right now. So the next thing we need to do is worry about how we're going to style this component. Now that we have the HTML in place, now we need to worry about our styling. And we deleted the style tag that was up in the head. And instead of inline styling it, I think what I'd like to do for this particular example is go ahead and create a separate style sheet so that we can place them side by side and understand kind of what's in the HTML versus what we're doing in our CSS. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a new file in the root of our QR code component main folder, and I'm going to name it styles.css. After I've named it, I need to go ahead and link it to my HTML. So in my HTML head, I'm going to create a link tag, and I'm going to give it a rel equals style sheet so that the browser knows that this is a style sheet. And I'm going to give it an href of styles.css, and that's going to be the link to my style sheet. Now, just to ensure that that link is actually working, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say body, and I'm going to give that a background color of red. That way, once we see our design pulled up in our browser, we should be able to understand if the styles are working or not. As you can see, I went ahead and pulled up the browser. So now I have my component content over on the right, and I have my code on the left. And you can see that the background is indeed red. So we have confirmed that our CSS is doing what we thought it would be doing, and it is linked to our HTML. So I can go ahead and remove that body background color red rule, and we can start worrying about what our actual styles are for this component. The first thing I'm going to start with is the actual card itself. So I'm actually going to move the HTML to the lower part of my editor, and I'm going to have the CSS on top so that I can reference what's down in the HTML, but I can also see my CSS at the same time. So let's go ahead and start with our card class selector, and we're going to go ahead and give that a width, we already know, of 320 pixels. And we're going to go ahead and give it also a background color of white. Let's look at the design to see what else we need to add to this particular selector. Now this is going to be the box that's right here. So I have a width 320. The height, I always let the content control the height, so I'm not worried about the height there. We do have a border radius though, so let's go ahead and try and figure out what that border radius is. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to kind of command click on a Mac or control click on Windows, and we should be able to see that yes, indeed, we do have a 20 pixel border radius, and we also have a drop shadow that we need to add in. It's very faint, but there is definitely a drop shadow there. So we need to use box shadow to add that in. So let's go ahead and first add in our border radius back in our code, our border radius of 20 pixels, and then we need a box shadow, and we're going to go and see what these values are. If you click into the sun in Figma, you should be able to see what the settings are, and it gives you an XY blur and spread, exactly what CSS already has. So this is perfect. So we have X of 0, Y of 25 pixels, a blur of 25 pixels, a spread of 0. So let's add those values in. So we have 0, 25, 25, and 0 as well. And then we need a color. So in this case, the color is our hex values of 0, or we can use a different color version. In this case, I love HSL, so I'm going to use the HSL color for this particular box shadow. So we have 0, 0, 0, and then 4.77. After we add in the correct HSLA values of 0, 0%, 0%, and 0.0477, we should have a very faint box shadow. Once again, kind of hard to see because it's only really about 5% opacity, so you're not really seeing much there, but it definitely is there, so we definitely account for that. The other thing I want to do to go ahead and set apart the body from the card itself is to go ahead and give our body our background color. So let's go see what that color is. I'm going to X all that out, come into our body by clicking desktop up here, and it looks like it's this light gray color. So we can confirm this if we go ahead. Let me see if we can find that somewhere. Okay, it is here. Yeah, it's filled in light gray. So I'm going to go ahead and bust this and see what this is in HSL again. And that is 211, 45, 89, and 100%. For ease of copying, I guess I'll go ahead and just grab the hex code and drop this into a CSS variable or a CSS custom property. Now, normally with a CSS custom property, I like to put it in the root selector. The root selector is a CSS selector that basically means target the root of whatever the document is. If it's an SVG, it's going to target the root of the SVG element, or if it's HTML, in this case, it's going to target the root of that. And that's going to basically add a global custom property to our CSS that we can use anywhere else or override as needed. So I'm going to add in a light gray here, and we are going to give it that hex value that we copied over from our Figma design, and then we're just going to go ahead and give the body selector that background color of that var light gray, and that should give it the correct background color, which indeed it does. One of the things that's making our component look really bad right now is the fact that the image is just overflowing our card. So the way that we do that is by controlling the actual width of the image. Going ahead and setting the width of the image to 100% will ensure that it stays within the boundaries of our card. So let's go ahead and add a card image selector, and then we're just going to say width 100%, and that should bring it within the boundaries of the card. And now that we have it within those boundaries, what I can see is that we also haven't added any padding or controlled the overflow of the card itself. So even though we have a corner radius up top, we don't have that corner radius. It's not cutting off anything. It's not hiding the overflow at both the top left and top right corners. And really the bottom left corner also has overflow that it's not hiding. So our card, we also need to add a rule of overflow hidden, and that will ensure that we don't have any of that overflow showing outside the boundaries of our card. So the padding that I'm talking about is a space between the actual card div and the stuff inside it. So if I hold down my Option key on a Mac, I think it's Alt on Windows, then we see how much space we're getting from the image itself to the side of the card. And that's 16 pixels on top, left, bottom, and I believe, or sorry, top, left, right, and it looks like it's 40 pixels on the bottom. So we're going to be setting that padding rule to make sure that we account for that 40 pixels on the bottom. So let's go ahead and say padding. Let's just go ahead and say left 16, padding, right is going to be 16 pixels. The padding top is going to be 16 pixels, and the padding bottom is going to be that 40 pixels. So that looks much, much better. We already have a card image selector. So let's see, there's only one other thing that I'm seeing with our image itself, and that's going to be the fact that we need the border radius to show on that versus the design. You can see there's a border radius here. We definitely want that to show. So let's see what the value that is. And that's 10 pixels. So we'll go ahead and set that on our card image. So border radius 10 pixels. One thing that I'm seeing that's different between the card that I'm seeing over here and the card over here is the fact that if we look at our actual inspector, we can see that the width of the card is actually 352 pixels, and the width over here is only 320 pixels. Why is that happening? Well, that's actually because of our padding and in combination with the default box sizing that CSS is going to give any div that we create. So if we want the box sizing to work in a more modern way, we need to tell the box sizing to always use border box, which is essentially the modern way that we use CSS box sizing. So if I go ahead and kind of give a reset rule here, I'm going to say box sizing border box, and that's going to essentially force the padding to, instead of going outside or pushing out from our width and increasing the size, it's going to push in and not change the width that we've already defined for our card itself. Overall, this is looking pretty good. We still need to address the title and the description for our challenge. Now, the title and the description have a different font than the one that is by default here. I believe it's Times that HTML and CSS use by default. So we need to go ahead and grab that font, bring it into our page, probably from Google Fonts, and then we'll use that font to go ahead and set the title and the description of our component. In order to do that, we just need to go to Google Fonts, and then we need to search for that font, which I believe is called Outfit. After we found the font we want, we can just go to the selected families, which it is Outfit right here, and we can click on the Get Embed Code button. Now, the Get Embed Code button is going to give us the links that essentially we're going to drop in the head of our HTML document, and it's also going to tell us how exactly we can use that font family throughout our CSS. So I'm going to copy this code and I'm going to drag it over to our HTML and put it in the head of our document right above our own style sheet. And then I'm also going to look at how we use this font family. Now, if we were doing some different classes for each different weight or something like that, this might make sense, but instead we're going to just go ahead and give the body a single font family. Since we're only using a couple of weights, we're going to go ahead and give it a single font family of Outfit. So my body selector, I'm going to add in my font family of Outfit sans serif, and that should go ahead back in our challenge. That should go ahead and change our font, which it has, to the correct font that we see here. The other thing that I always look at when I'm looking at a Chrome browser or a WebKit browser versus what we see in a Figma design is the font always comes out looking a little bit heavier unless you change your subpixel anti-aliasing property. This is a little bit weird on a WebKit browser, but it's one of the things that we need to set in our reset to say WebKit font smoothing. It's supposed to be anti-aliased. And this essentially makes the font look exactly like it does in Figma. This is a weird kind of, I don't know, hack trick, something like that. But it definitely does what we needed to do in making the font look like it gets output in Figma. Now on to our text. We need to both style our card title and our card description. So let's go ahead and take those one by one, starting with the card title. In this case, we want to come over to our Figma document, click on that, and see what the values are. So we have its font weight bold. It's going to be a font size of 22 pixels. It's going to be a line height. It says auto, but if we click in, we can see that that is 28 pixels, and there's no letter spacing or anything like that. And we also have a color we'll come back and grab. So it's bold, 22, 28. Let's go ahead and put that in our CSS. So font size is going to be 22 pixels. The line height is going to be 28 pixels. Everything else should be, font weight is going to be bold. And then we have a color as well. So I'm going to copy this color. I'm going to bring it over to my root selector, and I'm going to give it a, let's see what the actual value of this should be, or the actual name of this should be. And it looks like it's dark navy. So I'm going to go ahead and come over here and say dark navy is going to be equal to this hex code, this dark navy hex code. So in that case, I'm going to say color is going to be equal to var dark navy, and that should set it to the proper color. The other thing I'm seeing, it should be centered. So I'm going to say text align center, and that should center it up just fine, like it does. Next, on to the card description. For the card description, the font's definitely going to be a little smaller, but let's see what our values are in Figma. We have its normal or regular. It's a font size of 15, a line height of 19, a little bit of letter spacing, which we'll have to account for, and it's a different color as well. So let's go ahead and set these values, 15, 19, and 0.19. So font size is going to be 15 pixels. The line height is going to be 19 pixels. The letter spacing is going to be 0.19 pixels. And the color is going to be equal to this color right here. Of course, like the others, I want to set this as a CSS variable. So if we ever need to use this again, we can. And it looks like it's this light gray color that we're actually using here. Or actually, sorry, it's this gray color, the 7D88. So I'm going to go ahead and call this up in my variables. I'm going to call this gray, and I'm going to put that value there. And then down in my card description, I'm going to go ahead and use that using var -- gray, and that will enable us to use that. Now this looks a little bit different than our design. You can see this is 2 lines, and in our design, it's actually 3 lines. And we have all the right values, but it looks like it's because we have a little bit of spacing that we haven't accounted for yet. So on the left and right, we actually want to add 16 pixels of probably padding or margin in this case. So I'm going to say padding left 16 pixels, padding right of 16 pixels. And I also need to go ahead and say text align center, and that will center it up just fine. So as I look through this with my inspector, there's still a couple of things that are a little bit off. We haven't accounted for the spacing in between the title and description. I don't think we've accounted for the margin top and bottom for the description itself. So we have a couple of margins we need to fix. But other than that, we're looking pretty good. There's also a tiny bit of space. It's kind of hard to see in this case, but there's a tiny bit of space between the title margin and the image itself. So we may have to go ahead and flex our card in the column direction in order to tighten up all of that spacing. And in fact, that's what I'm going to go ahead and do. I'm going to go up into our card, and I'm going to say display flex. And I'm going to say flex direction column, and that's going to flex everything up and down. So it's looking pretty good right now. Let's double check and see. So now we got rid of that space between our title and our description. And now we just need to go ahead and change the margins on both our title and our description. So in this case, the margin top between our title and our image is going to be 24 pixels. So I'm going to say card title, margin top, 24 pixels. And in this case, I'm going to say margin bottom of 0, just to let the description take care of the rest. In the description itself, it's going to have a margin top of 16 and of course a margin bottom of 0 as well. So we can say margin top is going to be 16 pixels and margin bottom of 0. Okay, let me go ahead and close out our inspector. The only other thing that I'm seeing as I'm looking at our design versus this card component that we've created is that we're not currently placing it in the center of the page. And we were saying we were going to do that using a flex display on the body itself. So if I go up to the body and I say display flex, then I can say align items center and justify content center, and that should put it in the center of the page. I'm also going to say margin 0, and I'm going to give it a min height of 100 VH, or 100 vertical height units of the page, so that as we zoom out, it's going to keep it in the center of our page. Okay, that's looking really good right now. Let's look at this at 100% versus this at 100%. I'm seeing them, it's looking awesome. I think it's looking perfect to the design. So I think we've created a pixel perfect design. Once we're happy with where our HTML and CSS and our output is, we can deploy this using Netlify by logging in and essentially just dragging and dropping our folder into Netlify's interface. So under sites, you can just go ahead and drag and drop the same folder, and that will allow you to upload your index.html and give you a URL that you can send to others, you can add to your portfolio, or you can give to Frontend Mentor itself so you can see how well you did with this challenge. I hope this entire video has been so helpful for you, and if it has, please give me a thumbs up and a like. And if you really like this video and you want to get more content from me just like this, be sure to subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next video.